Jesus is the answer for the world today. Above him there's no other, 'cause Jesus is the way.
Today we're going to begin talking about the subject of sexual abuse. We're going to find out that this is a lot more complicated subject and it has a lot more consequences and problems than maybe you ever thought before. And we're also going to find out that the defenses that a person puts up for the abuse can actually be more damaging than the abuse itself. Long-term dealing with that person and dealing with those issues. A lot of the material we're looking at is going to come from The Wounded Heart by Reiner. Let me tell you a little bit about how that book was developed. Dr. Reiner was a psychologist, and he had ladies starting to come with him that had been sexually abused as children, and he had had no training in it at all, because in the training of psychology, this hadn't been addressed. And so he basically said, look, I don't have any training, I haven't got a clue. If you want to come to me anyway, I'll learn from you and we'll figure out what to do just from the different people that he had coming. And that's what he did, and from that he developed this book called The Wounded Heart, that we're going to take some of this material from to help us get much deeper. In my opinion, this book goes the deepest into the area of abuse of any of them, and there's a workbook that you can use with your clients, so it's very effective and very useful. But first, let's look at the overall problem of sexual abuse. What's interesting here is that you're going to get a very high population of people who have been sexually abused in therapy. Why? Because it messes people up so bad in a lot of different areas that they're going to come to you for counseling. The suggestion is that sexual abuse is as high as 60% in the lower class. It's less as you go up the classes. Some research says females 11 to 22%, in some cases as high as 38%. Males 5 to 9% have been sexually abused. 60% have been forced or threatened by the offender. Earlier studies actually had higher rates, but they weren't as precise as what we're looking at today. Dynamics of the abuse. First, what are the different levels of sexual abuse? The first is just verbal interactions, sexual comments, seduction, other stuff like that. Then exposure to sexual stimuli, actual or pornography. Then psychological sexual abuse. This erodes the child-adult boundary, and it's with a confidant and so on. So we have emotional incest. What's emotional incest? Emotional incest is where somebody, like a mom, as an example, is telling the boy about the relationships with the dad and all the stuff that's going on in the family. In other words, that she's developing more like an adult relationship with the child. And it could be the other way around. Less severe sexual abuse would be like sexual kissing, touching with the clothes on. Severe is unclothed contact, touching, penetration, breast contact, simulated intercourse. And very severe is intercourse, oral or anal sex. Levels of abuse. To the extent it disrupts the protection and the nurturance of the parental bond. Incest by parent is the most damaging. Do you see the idea? In other words, if it is somebody like a boy comes over or so on, that isn't as damaging because you don't expect that other person necessarily to take care of you and protect you. But when the person that's supposed to protect you, who's supposed to take care of you and have your best interest in mind, is the one that is doing it, it's much more damaging. When we see the consequences here in a little bit, you'll understand that a whole lot more. The strategies of abuse. How does it usually occur? Usually there's a development of intimacy and secrecy. The pedophile, the sexual offender, usually picks somebody that they just sort of know is desperate for affection and is needy. And then they develop sort of a special relationship with them. And then the next step is physical contact that appears appropriate. Oh, they just give you a big hug. And you sort of have this feeling, that's a little bit much of a hug for just being a friend. And then finally, the sexual abuse proper. Betrayal, powerlessness, ambivalence. And then pressure from the relationship, the sexual pressure, and then maintenance of the abuse and secrecy by threats and privileges. So it's a whole pattern type of a thing that goes on. And later on when we talk about the sexual offender, we're going to see that there's a whole pattern that is built in the person's life, where abuse is a planned out thing. What are some of the factors that are involved? There are a lot of them, but the first, isolation, unsatisfied married sex, marital discord, role reversal. That means where the wife is sort of put down in the family like almost one of the kids, and one of the kids is sort of elevated almost like the mom of the family. Dependent or powerless wife, mentally or physically ill wife, sexually punitive absent mother, family dysfunction, alcoholism, and the very last on the list, and I question this one to a certain degree, it is possible for a child to be brought up that way that they're sort of seductive. But that we really discount that today a lot more. We're going to see a little bit in the history of this, of how bad things were in the past. So abusers, what types of abusers do we have? Well, one type, they're trying to use sex to solve internal problems. We call that medicating emotions. They try to use sex to try to deal with these internal problems or medicating their emotions. Sexual addiction. Remember, sexual addiction, again, is just using sex as a drug to try to feel better, to try to control emotions. But again, there's no end to that. A sexual addict wants sex every way they can possibly get it, and sometimes they'll cross the lines into childhood sexual abuse. Majority of sexual abusers are married or have been previously married. Pedophilia. And we have different categories of this, and this is sort of important, especially a couple of these, to understand. Now, what are pedophiles? These are people that are targeting children. The first they call patterned. They have a repeat with a deviant arousal for children. So they have programmed themselves, or some way or another they've been programmed so that they get sexually turned on to children. Episodic. That means it only happens every so often that they fall into this. Regressed. Primary sexual attraction is to age mates, including adequate sexual functioning, situational and alcohol-related onset as an adult. In other words, the reason they probably did the abuse is they were drunk. They really would rather be having sex with people of their same age, but this girl or this boy was available, and so they crossed the line maybe when they were drunk and so on. And this is called regressed, and of course they have a much higher probability of being helped than what is called fixated. The hardest type of pedophile, the type that sometimes they lock up for the rest of their lives in the hospital is incorrigible, are fixated pedophiles. Premeditated, regardless of stress, identify with children, little age mate contact, immature, and inadequate personalities onset in teenage. In fact, what actually happens is sometimes they get stopped in their development, and they'll have an actual age target that I will only be looking for either boys or girls age 7 to 10. And if you look back, that's probably when they were abused or something traumatic happened in their life, and they've never really gone beyond that. And so to them, they're just plain doctor. Now the problem here is the amount of denial, and we're going to see that a lot later, but I want to give you an idea of how consuming this can be and how damaging this can be. They did a particular study of pedophiles. I think these had been arrested and used lie detectors and so on and so forth. They had 232 fixated pedophiles, and they admitted to 55,250 sexual encounters to children. That's an average of 238 attempts and 167 successes of abusing children. So how damaging and how dangerous is this? And how widespread can this be just from one particular abuser? Remember the stuff in the past with Catholic priests, who again are supposed to be celibate and so on, that were abusing kids. How many people were abused in some of these parishes? You see the idea? In another case, 53 pedophiles were responsible for 25,757 abuses. It was 485 per pedophile. How much damage, and of course you're going to get the damaged people and the damaged kids that come from all this kind of thing. You can see why the courts are so strong on this and why they now have laws that say if we don't believe that you can be helped in this particular area, that we lock you up for the rest of your life and don't let you back out in the street. And see, part of this is they don't even know for sure sometimes of what's going on in their lives. You know, well, I got up in the morning and it was a nice day, so I went out for a walk. And I just happened to sit down on the bench across from the grade school when the grade school let out. And this kid came by and they were very seductive, do you understand? I mean, this is all denial, junk, everything else. When we talk totally about the abuser, we're going to see that. Sometimes, of course, we have incest in the family. And those usually are not pedophiles, except in cases where sometimes they're, the person marries someone, they don't know they're a pedophile, and therefore it's like the stepdad, and so on and so forth. I actually had a case where a mom called me and said, I have some concerns here that my husband, she wasn't married to him that long, every time my daughter takes a shower, he seems to disappear. I went up upstairs and I found a hole in the roof looking down into the shower. And then I found him masturbating to a picture of my daughter and her friend. And my daughter always seems to have money. What do you think? Well, it turned out he came in, but when I told him we had to report sexual abuse and so on, he would not continue in therapy. We tried to get him to go to a specialist downtown. He never showed up for that. So I had to file a report. And when I did, the police officer on the other end said, is he such and such an age? He already had a prior conviction. Went to jail for 14 years. And the sentences have actually been increased in this particular area. So what are the requirements for a pedophile to abuse? Be willing and have an opportunity. That's it. Because you notice what I said about fixated pedophiles? It isn't like they're only when their emotions are out of kilter or something like that, that they're medicating their emotions. This becomes a whole lifestyle. This is the way they get their needs for love met. And so this can be extremely difficult type of counseling that we're talking about here. But I said we'll spend an entire session just dealing with that. History of assigning responsibility. And by the way, the usual age of abuse is between 8 and 12. Why? That's when in development a girl tries to connect to her dad. And therefore they're more vulnerable and they're more open during that time period. Listen to this statement. 1962. The majority of pedophiles are harmless individuals, and their victims are usually known to be aggressive and seductive children. Kinsey, in the famous Kinsey report, thought that sexual abuse did little harm. And of course, we've had confusion since then, mixed results as to who says what about causes and so on. And of course, part of it is, why don't the kids stop? We'll talk about that later, but there's a lot of reasons. A lot of times they're blaming themselves. Then the next level is blaming the mother, because the mother didn't prevent it. And of course, there are different levels, aren't there? Like, could we agree that active encouragement by the mother is probably not very acceptable? Indirect responsibility, blamed on the mother because the mother's withholding sex. Failure to set limits, denies the knowledge of it. So we have all this confusion that goes on in this particular area. Family systems, marriage and family therapy, had a tendency to blame the family. Their overall picture of incest is what happens is that the family gets turned upside down, that one of the children became like the adult and the mother becomes like the child, and so the father has sex with the daughter that's been elevated. Again, we don't look at it that way. We look at that this is out and out abuse. I don't care what's going on. That doesn't give anyone a right to abuse anybody else. Incest data. 44% had also, of the perpetrators, also abused unrelated females and 11% males. 18% of perpetrators had raped. 59% had begun to be abusers as teenagers. But the main thing I want to really emphasize today is the trap of the abuse. Because if you can't get in the head of the abused person, you really can't understand all the confusion and all the problems that are going on in their head and how they're seeing things and how these defenses end up just causing havoc and so many problems and so many things in people's lives. And when a person is abused, they sort of go one of a number of different directions. The first one is they see the abuser as the enemy. As this person came in, they hurt me, they're the enemy. Sounds pretty logical, right? But what are the consequences of that kind of thing? Well, either they end up fighting the person, they become a man-hater, they become someone that hates these people, and especially if these people are their parents, what have they just done? Cut themselves off from their parents. They try to forget it. And the more you try to forget it, the more you focus on the person that did it to you. Or they try to make a commitment never to hurt again. What happens if you say, I'm never going to hurt again? You now put up all these defenses and keep you from hurting again. But when you do that, see, if I kill my bad emotions as I see them, what happens to my good emotions? I kill them too. So basically, I don't have a life. And finally, the protection that I put up increases my pain. See, normally the person was desperate anyway for love and for acceptance, for relationship. And now they get hurt, and what do? Put up barriers that keep them away from love and relationship and the very things that they need to be okay. Protection from pain leads to broken relationships, loneliness, eating disorders, sexual promiscuity, sexual coldness, or frightening rage. See, do you understand? If I'm sexually promiscuous, I don't really connect to those people. And I sort of get my needs met, but I really don't. It doesn't really work. Or if I become frigid and run away from all relationships, it all turns on me and causes me all of these problems. Another trap, and this is a big one, and this is why a lot of ladies just end up in bad relationships after bad relationships after bad relationships. I can see the enemy as my longings. See, how did I get abused? I was needy. I had longings to be loved and be cared for. And so I didn't have good boundaries. I didn't see it coming. I found someone that seemed like they loved me and cared for me, and then eventually they ended up abusing me. So my problem is what? It's my longings to be loved, isn't it? So therefore, I'll just kill them. Now what happens? She goes out and she meets some guy, good, wonderful guy, could have a good relationship with, maybe even get married and have a good life. What does she do? I can't do that. I might feel for this guy. I might have longings for this guy, and if I have longings for this guy, I could be abused. I can't have him. Who can I have? Distant people that I'll never care for, that I'll know will never make me long for them or want them, so therefore I can keep my distance from them, and now I'm stuck with distant relationships, with distant people who will never really meet my needs. And of course it happens time again. But they don't meet my needs, so I get rid of this one and I get another one, and they don't meet my needs, but I can't ever get anyone that's really going to meet my needs because that would be too scary. I'd run the other way from healthy, good people. The true enemy is a desire to only trust myself instead of let God meet my internal needs. Do you see that what happens? If you hurt me, I say to myself, I can't trust you. You don't have my best interest in mind. In fact, I can't trust anyone. And if I can't trust anyone, who am I going to trust? Me? And now I'm in that whole trap of being my own God, doing my own thing, and I'm going to control things, and I'm going to make things the way I want them to be, and I'm going to trust me to make myself safe. And when I do that, I get deeper and deeper into this trap and farther away from God and farther away from getting my needs met. And I'm more in control of my life and what is going on. See, the problem is we blame the wrong thing, don't we? What is the real issue here? Well, let's call it depravity. What's depravity? It's my want to run my own life and do my own thing and protect myself and take charge of my own life. The second part of that is shame. When I do that, what do I find out? I'm really not God, am I? I really can't do this. So I'm ashamed that I don't measure up. I'm ashamed that I can't be everything I want to be. I'm ashamed that I can't run my entire life. And I cover that all up because I don't want you to see me, because if you saw what I was really like inside, of how selfish I really am, how depraved I really am, you would reject me. So I have to lie to myself and hide all that stuff inside of me. And of course, the abused person goes a lot further than that, because they're blaming themselves many times. Why do they blame themselves? It felt good. It was wonderful to be special to that guy or that person. So it must be that I wanted it. It must be my fault. See, it's not, because our body automatically responds sexually, and we automatically have a need to be loved and to be cared for. But it's easy to turn it on yourself. And it's hard for a counselor to say, it's not your fault, because almost all people that have been sexually abused like this turn it on themselves and see it as their fault. That's where theophostic can come in. I was actually teaching the theophostic class quite a few years ago, and I had a lady, and she said, I don't want to do that, it doesn't work with me. So of course we had to do it with her. And when she finally met Jesus, she just broke down crying. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. It's not my fault, because when Jesus told her that the abuse was not her fault, it just broke something inside of her. And it changed the entire picture. Because see, as long as it's my fault, there's something inadequate in me, there's something wrong with me, and therefore I'm afraid. Contempt is another thing people use as a defense. I had one particular client, her husband was addicted to painkillers, and I've never seen contempt on this level. She could peel the paint off the walls. But see, what is contempt all about? It's blame shifting. It's when I feel that there's something wrong with me and I'm not good enough, but if I can say, all men are pigs, and I can blame them totally, I'm deflecting the shame from me. I'm doing that because I don't want you to see how I feel about myself and I felt I had a part in this and so on. What does contempt do? Well, it diminishes the shame. It feels like it does, doesn't really. It deadens the longings. Because if you are a pig, then do I have to have a relationship with you? It gives me an illusion of control. I'm in charge. You're all bad. You're all no good. I'm going to keep you out of my life. That's the only thing that makes sense. Of course, therefore, my needs don't get met. And therefore, I'm dead emotionally. It distorts the real problem. Is the real problem is that there are some people out there that are sexual abusers, so therefore I'm going to write off everybody and get in my little cocoon and just withdraw into myself and protect myself? That's the answer? If you don't want to live, it is. See the problem. Now, what's the damage? The first thing, and this is very important because this is almost universal, the damage is powerlessness. I was in a situation, especially if the person was raped and forced or controlled or something, they feel powerless. When I feel powerless, how does that affect me? Well, first, if I'm a kid at home, and there's somebody abusing me in the family and there's nothing I can do about it, how do I feel? Do I feel safe? Can I trust my family? So what do? Well, this must be normal. I don't know of anything else, right? This must be the way it is. I end up with emptiness. I end up that this is routine, and I basically just bury it all. But what does it do to me inside? I'm a worthless, no good person. I feel helpless. Nothing I can do. I told my mom and she said I was all wrong. I lied. Am I going to connect with people very close? I'm going to be distant. Self-doubt, despair, abandon hope. If this is what life's like, do I want it? You can even get to a place where you get a loss of sense of pain, a loss of sense of self, a loss of sense of judgment. And when you have those things, what's going to happen? Re-victimization. It's going to happen over again, because now I'm not already judging anymore. I'm just in these absolutes, and everything just turns out to be a real mess. It looks like you're in control, doesn't it? But see, it's that control, that withdrawal, those defenses, that pretty soon I don't have a life anymore. And what else is going to happen then? Well, do you think I might use some drugs or some alcohol? Or do you think I might use sex to kill my pain, to try and meet my needs at an artificial level? Do you think I might use a little bit of false intimacy? Romance addiction, relationship addiction? That's why when you see this and you find out this, and we always ask this question during intake, it can make sense out of a lot of the other stuff that you're dealing with, and you don't know why you're dealing with all of this, and it all goes back to someone being sexually abused. The next big one is betrayal. What is a parent supposed to do? Or an uncle supposed to do? Or even an adult in society is supposed to do? They're supposed to take care of kids and protect them, right? And the more that that's true, the more the betrayal I'm going to feel. See, if you're my enemy and you're coming at me and you hurt me, that's not really betrayal, because you are my enemy. But what if you're my friend and you stab me in the back and you say how much you love me and how much you care for me? See, how about Judas? When Judas is one of the disciples and he sells out Jesus. See how much more horrendous that is than Caiaphas, who's Jesus' enemy, trying to take him out. And it's the same thing here. The more the person has an obligation to be on your side, or the more you think they're on your side, and then they abuse you, the greater the damage, and the greater the hurt, and the greater the pain. Because even if my friends are out to get me, then where do I go? What other choices do I have? Many times it's also shame of being taken advantage of. Think of it this way. If the Fuller brush salesman comes to the door and you buy $200 worth of Fuller brushes, how do you feel? Yeah, they were a good salesman, but I agreed to it. In the same way, that needy kid, that many times they get into it, they have no feeling at all as to what they're getting into, because they don't know anything about sexuality. And so they feel that they must have wanted it, or they were part of it or something, or at least they didn't report it, or they didn't do anything about it. So therefore, it's their fault. And especially if this has gone on for years, out of either coercion or bribes or other reasons, they feel they should have reported it, and they blame themselves. And that's where we have the shame there. Of course, with a non-offending parent, here's an interesting statement. Usually the person that's abused is more angry at the one that didn't defend them than at the abuser themselves. Obviously, if the non-offending parent was in complicity, that's huge. But even if it was due to neglect or denial, that's huge. And you're going to find the anger level at that person that should have protected them, or said, "You're lying, that isn't true, I don't believe your dad would ever do that." That kind of thing. That's huge. The rage that you can get when that person didn't defend them. Think of this. Think of this betrayal. Amira Gandhi. How was she assassinated? By her own guards. See, they were supposed to be protecting her. That was their job. And they were the ones that killed her. That's what we're talking about here. Cost of betrayal. Hypervigilance. If even my best friends are going to stab me in the back, do I have to watch out for myself? Every moment of the day. I can't trust anyone. Suspiciousness. Can't trust my friends. Can't trust anyone. Distortion or denial. Do I want to admit that I'm living in a world like that? Loss of hope of intimacy. If I can't trust my friends, can I ever be intimate? That is, be open to be known and know as I really am, and let you be vulnerable to you. What if I'm vulnerable to you and I can't trust my best friends? You see how it shuts down everything and shuts down your relationships? Loss of hope, loss of strength, and sometimes loss of justice. Is there any justice in this world? It was my dad. It was my mom. It was my uncle. It was one of my best friends that did this to me. They see themselves as abused because of some terrible flaw in their soul or body. They see themselves as valueless because of these people that were to value me treated me this way. I must be valueless. Self-contempt. Instead of blaming other people, they turn it on themselves. Interesting response. I've had this a number of times. Very heavy ladies. Do you know why they're heavy? And they'll tell you. Because that way no man would ever want them. So that makes them safe. See, does it really make them safe to get their needs met? Is that really a healthy, good life that they're putting together for themselves? And then the most devastating of all, ambivalence. It's defined as feeling two contradictory emotions at the same time. That good feeling that you're important, that you're cared for, that there's somebody there with you, that you are special, that you have a special relationship with, and that other feeling that you're being used. That the reason they really have this special relationship is because you're being used, because of your body, or because they want some sexual high, or some other reason like that. And it's very confusing, isn't it? See, is this good or is this bad? Is it good that I have this special relationship with my dad? And I'm the special kid in the family? Of course, he uses me sexually, or fondles me. But that's what I pay for my special relationship. We all have a desire to be wanted, don't we? Are we willing to pay the price? To a woman, what does this feel like, this ambivalence thing? How about being a prostitute? Why do prostitutes do what they do? Well, they have a good part. They get money, right? Sometimes they make a lot of money. But they're giving something of themselves and they feel used, and so those two things collide. What's the cost? Massive shame and contempt. Promiscuity. Confirms that it's her fault. Ladies usually either go the promiscuous direction after being sexually abused, or they go the more frigid, avoiding deal. But do you see, if they're promiscuous now, what does that say? See, it must not have been the abuser's fault. Look what I'm like. That's what I am. The truth is, she's just trying to cope and be safe and still feel loved. And she's got it all confused. See, sexual abuse breaks the formula. The formula is supposed to be, I find somebody, I care for them, they have my best interest in mind, we form a team, it's sexualized, it's all great, it's all wonderful and healthy. Sexual abuse is when you care for somebody, they use you. When you care for somebody, they really don't care for you. They just use you, and if you want to be cared for, you got to be used. See the ambivalence again? What do? I'm trapped. Secondary damage. Depression, denial or minimization of the abuse, sexual dysfunction, compulsive disorders, especially bulimia, and addictions. So to sum this all up and to put it together, sexual abuse results in one of three types of girls. The good girl, that's self-contempt. You'd be amazed how they'll let their boundaries be run over and just let everything happen to them, because what are they feeling? It was my fault. I'm no good. I got to take whatever I can take, and if I'm nice enough, maybe people will take care of and meet my needs. The tough girl, this is other contempt, and you'll be able to pick them out of the crowd. They're hard on the outside. There's a hard exterior. In other words, other contempt. I can't trust you, so I'm taking care of myself. And I'll run you over if I have to. And then what they call the party girl. This is ambivalent contempt. That's where part of the time they're mad at other people, part of the time they're mad at themselves, but they're going to be the party girl, go out to the bars, do whatever they can to try and get their needs met. Easygoing, inconsistent combination of self and other contempt, paradoxical, unstable, fickle, seductive, chronic dissatisfaction. Now those are sort of boxes, but usually people that are sexually abused are going to fit pretty much. They're either going to be that, we would call it the codependent, dependent, passive, right? Or the codependent, dependent rescuer, or an avoidant of some sort. So let's put that all together. Do you see the trap? This thing happens, and they don't realize that you're in the trap, but the way the person normally reacts causes all of this stuff and all the defenses and things that happen here. Usually, they're going to ensure it never happens again. Attack the need, or attack myself, or attack the other people, or attack the protector, or admit that I'm a fool. Which one of those do I want to do? Are any of those useful? But those are the different directions that you're going to see. What's the needed response? To realize that I'm a sinner, to realize that I can't do things, to realize that I have been hurt, and to turn my life over to God and control of my life over to God. Let Him meet my needs, but decide to live again. That means I got to take chances, but I can rely on God to be my protector and to make my life work out the way it's supposed to work out. And this is a huge choice and a huge problem. We'll talk more about it as we talk about first, recovery for the victim, and then recover for the perpetrator. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you that even when the devil comes in to destroy and to kill and to steal and to abuse, even sexually, at the deepest part of a person, that, Lord, you have answers and that you are our answer and that you will take care of us. And, Lord, that we can find complete healing. And we give you all the glory and the honor in Jesus' name. Amen.
Jesus is the answer for the world today. Above Him there's no other, 'cause Jesus is the way. Jesus is the answer for the world today. Above Him there's no other.